to bring into the conversation national security expert, CEO of Global Risk and Intelligence Planning, Hal Kempfer. Hal, good to see you. I was off yesterday, but a lot of news, of course, over the weekend. Now, first, let's start off. The U.S. House of Representatives had an unclassified phone briefing this morning on the flying objects that were shot down. We'll get into what was learned in that. But National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby today said the 3 small objects shot down could be, quote, for commercial or benign purpose and may, quote, not be tied to any foreign government or espionage effort. So I think there's a contradiction at play here, and help me understand it. Maybe some viewers have it as well. If there is a commercial or benign purpose, if this is not seen as threatening from a hostile foreign actor, what would necessitate shooting it down with an F-22?
Andrew, I think what we're working out is the protocols, if you will. One thing they did was they adjusted the parameters by which they identify various things flying. Of course, there are balloons out there, and you and I had talked about this a while back during when the Chinese surveillance balloon was flying, that there are a lot of balloons that fly. In fact, a lot of weather balloons that fly. And of course, there's a variety of commercial balloons that fly for advertising or other purposes. And sometimes they get loose, and sometimes they just go with the prevailing winds. So it's very, very possible that that's what it is. However, with adjusting the parameters, they're also finding them flying in areas where they could endanger commercial air traffic. And I think that was the biggest issue they had, was they'd see these things. Of course, you have to remember, if there's some sort of cylindrical object or something, which could be some sort of airship or something flying at 40 knots, and you're in an F-22, your stall speed in an F-22 is over 200 knots. So whenever you're looking at it, you're going to be moving by that thing very quickly, and you're going to have to make an assessment. And they made an assessment, and they decided to shoot them down. Part of what we're seeing is the decision process whereby they decide to shoot these things down has been dramatically shortened, and they're taking no chances. But this is all a reaction, if you will, to the Chinese surveillance balloon. Yeah. And I think some of it is actually a political reaction, all the criticism they took for being reluctant to shoot down that balloon earlier.
Yeah. But Hal, you're hearing officials talk about these objects in the vaguest of terms. I've heard the word object. I've heard the word cylindrical. You and I, who were speaking about this on Friday, you were maybe possibly postulating it could be drones. I've heard balloons as well. So what is it? I mean, we just don't know.
We don't know. And honestly, the commander of U.S. Northern Command, who's also over NORAD, kind of opened it up. During a press conference, he was asked, someone asked, could this be extraterrestrial? And unfortunately, he answered saying, well, I'm not ruling anything out, or words to that effect, which kind of opened up the door to a lot of speculation. And then, of course, referring to them as flying objects that are unidentified. Well, some could rearrange that and say they're identified flying objects or UFOs. And frankly, see a number of maps where they actually show them as UFOs. And of course, that has got the speculation flying. You saw, Marco Rubio talking about these things in context of the UAP effort that's going on right now, where they're trying to identify all sorts of unidentified aerial phenomena, whatever it may be, and kind of lumping this in there. What they appear to be are some sort of, for lack of a better term, airships. They appear to have lighter than air capability. They loiter for a very long period of time, which they could be hybrid. Originally, when we looked at it, it looked like there might be a little maneuverability, maybe some hybrid thing, lighter than air characteristics with a drone steer. But as more has come out and more been talked about, I should say, or more been revealed, they pretty much are drifting along with the wind, which indicates they probably were just lighter than aircraft or lighter than airships, if you will. And they may have had some dirigible light characteristics. The one that's octagonal shape may have had some sort of light superstructure inside. It's not clear yet. But when they see them and they're in that space between, say, commercial airspace below 40,000 feet, they've just been saying, let's go ahead and take them out so they don't pose a risk to commercial aviation. And that comes with risk too, as you saw, because they fired 2 Sidewinders
Yeah.
at the one over Lake Huron. One hit, the other did not hit.
Yeah.
And of course, that's raised the question, well, where did it go?
Right.
So,
Well, we'll get into that in just a moment. So I guess the distinction here is the legal assessment is that objects were not engaged in hostile actions, but they could not rule out, officials could not rule out whether or not the objects themselves were sent or directed by like a hostile country. So you're listening into the word hostile a lot here. I want to put up the tweet, this, what you just alluded to from Lucas Tomlinson. He says, this is a Fox News scoop, by the way, exclusive to us, U.S. Air Force F-16 that shot down an unknown object over Lake Huron yesterday missed on its first attempt. U.S. officials say it's not clear where the missile first landed. A second Sidewinder air-to-air missile was needed. Each Sidewinder costs about $400,000. That's interesting. Obviously, that kind of adds to this, whether or not you can kind of look at the response and say if it was, you know, efficient or if it was shoddy. Losing a Sidewinder like this, I guess, what consequences would there be for that? Just embarrassing?
it's embarrassing, but obviously if the Sidewinder was to, you know, land in a populated area and explode, that would be more than embarrassing. That would be, there'd be legal implications probably coming from something like that. They're also going to have to look at this because Sidewinders are very expensive. Anything they do to take these things down is going to cost a certain amount of money, but Sidewinders are very expensive. And I think we're going to have to take a look at some of these things to figure out what risks do they pose and maybe do a different type of risk assessment to figure out if we want to take direct action, you know, basically using a Sidewinder or some missile to take out these, what could be commercial balloons. Now, they have said that one or two of them appeared to have something attached. It could have been a weather balloon with meteorological instrumentation. It wasn't quite clear. Two of them also appeared to have lines, basically somewhere around the balloon, which would indicate, I say balloon, airship, whatever it is, which would indicate that it was probably maybe a commercial thing. Certainly not something that was as sophisticated as what the Chinese had sent up with their surveillance balloon. So we're going to have to do a risk assessment on these to figure out, is it really worth shooting a $250,000 or $400,000 missile to take out some commercial balloon or weather balloon that just happened to stray into commercial airspace? And I think that's being worked out in the same way they're tightening up the parameters on what we look at. And one thing to always keep in mind, at any given time, there is a phenomenal amount of aviation activity all over. And radars can be adjusted a lot of different ways, so they can pick up on not just objects, but they can pick up on phenomena, you know, Doppler radar and stuff to pick up on weather. So these things can be adjusted to pick up on so much that they're a little bit overwhelmed with the data.
Okay.
And so what they're doing is they're trying to pick up on these things, but at the same time not trying to overwhelm themselves with getting too much data where it kind of paralyzes their ability to make decisions.
Do you think officials have been as transparent as they can be so far, or do you want more? I certainly want more.
I'd like to get more. I have to say it. This is something I do. Is I actually talk about strategic communications. I train, with the U.S. I train for officials on how to do this, and I would say within the way that this is being handled right now, there's a lot of room for improvement in terms of strategic communications between various entities of the U.S. government. They need to make sure they're saying the same thing across the board, and they need to not open these doors with talking about flying objects that are unidentified or allowing speculation to go on extraterrestrial craft or something like that. They need to make sure that they don't allow that to go because, frankly, you know, in the internet universe, if you will, there's just a lot of conspiracy stuff that's out there at any given time, and it doesn't need to feed that. They need to be very concise, very direct. And I will say, one thing is with the Chinese surveillance balloon, we saw that they have recovered a lot of the equipment, if you will, the technology, the systems that were used for collecting various different types of intelligence, whether it's signals intelligence or electro-optical or something else. And I am hoping that eventually gets displayed.
Okay.
So that it will kind of eliminate a lot of the discussion. Obviously, China won't like it, seeing that stuff displayed. But I think after all the discussion, all the coverage on this, it really is one of those times where they probably need to go a little bit further in disclosing exactly what it is, as opposed to holding.
So just the last bit on this, Hal, we're learning that the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, has been speaking with some of his Chinese counterparts. So there are conversations and discussions happening amongst U.S. and Chinese officials, albeit, quite hurried and salty. But the line of communication is open. This, of course, comes as the Iranian leader is meeting with President Xi of China this week as well. So a lot happening on that front. But let's get into just lastly, Hal, updates on the war in Ukraine. I want to put this tweet from Fox News Pentagon producer Liz Frieden. They're talking about Secretary Austin and General Milley's visit to Brussels, meeting with the Ukraine contact group, saying Austin speaking at NATO headquarters in Brussels, saying we stand united in our support for Ukraine's fight for freedom, and we will stand together, united and resolute for as long as it takes. So the Brussels meeting is happening as many officials, Hal, say that the new offensive on Russia's part has already begun.
It really has, and if you look at the sheer ferocity, if you will, of what the Russians are throwing against the Ukrainians, they're pushing hard. With that said, they're using a phenomenal amount of firepower, a tremendous amount of artillery. They're throwing troops in essentially what look like human wave attacks, and they're throwing a lot of armor onto these battlefields, and they're doing it poorly. And for the Ukrainians, that's something they can take a little bit of solace in. Is the tactics, procedures that the Russians are using are so poorly coordinated, so poorly thought out. The tank operators, the tank commanders, etc., are doing such a poor job that they're literally driving into minefields where they have to know it's a minefield and getting vehicles blowing up. And then there's been some video that's come out that shows where the follow-on vehicles will then turn and try to go around them into the same minefield and get themselves blown up. And they obviously just have no situational awareness of where they are or what they're dealing with. And even with that, the formation of their vehicles, if you will, going into a battlefield situation is so poorly done. They make themselves fairly lucrative targets. So that's the one side of this. All right. The other side, though, is the amount of ammunition that's being used by both sides is tremendous. It's well beyond what NATO had projected a war like this might be if you want to go back a few years. And one of the challenges we're having is not just in the U.S., but also with our NATO allies, is we have been neglecting our defense industrial base in terms of manufacturing artillery rounds, other types of ammunition. And we have been sitting on this for a long period of time. So now you suddenly are starting to use it, and we're having to sort of get the gears in motion, get this stuff back moving. But for example, with artillery rounds, when we started the war, if you were to put an order in a year ago and say, hey, we need 155 artillery rounds, it would probably take you about 12 months. Today, it might take you 28 months. That's a phenomenal lag time.
Hal, as always, we appreciate your insight into this. We'll definitely be speaking throughout the week if there are any more developments in both the offensive happening there in Ukraine and also with these high-altitude objects. Hal, thanks so much.
All right. Thank you.